Hey guys, how's it going? This is Dylan and welcome back to my channel. So today I want to talk about some of the tools that I use to create indie games. What are some of the advantages of using some of them? Why did I use them? Which ones are free or which ones are paid? So the first one that I use is Unity 3D. I love using Unity. I've used it for the last 4 years, and honestly I research on Real Game Engine. I also look at XNA. I looked at other tools out there to make games, and Unity was the one that was, to me, the easiest to use and also the most efficient. Because I think for me, one of my goals is I like to make games and focus on the game. I don't really like to just focus too much on the tool. And if the tool is too difficult to use, then it's gonna make my life much harder. So Unity makes my life a lot easier, which means that I can use a programming language that I'm pretty comfortable with, such as C#, and also use an IDE, the Unity Game Engine editor, that is super easy to use. And I can focus on the game, I can focus on the mechanics, I can focus on the overall game picture instead of actually trying to make a tool work. So Unity works really well. One of the things that I love about Unity is that I can target, like I said, multiple platforms. So it's basically just 1 to 2 clicks to change the platform. If you want to release your game to iOS, you can just go into File, Build Settings, and then select iOS, and then hit Build. That actually it's going to create a binary that I can release on the App Store. And then if I want to do the same with an Android build, which will create an APK, it's pretty much just 2 clicks away. I can also do, Steam, and I can do Mac OS, PC, and then there's a lot of console targets that I can do as well. So Unity has all that platform tools built into the editor, so it's pretty easy to do that. And then another tool that I use is Photoshop. And I use Photoshop for a lot of things, and the main reason why I love Photoshop is because it integrates pretty easy into Unity. So let's say that I want to save a file, a Photoshop file, which is a PSD extension, and I want to drop it into Unity. Unity actually works and integrates really well with Photoshop. So if I make a change to the Photoshop file, for example, I might be working on an icon. Let's say that I want Unity to recognize that icon. So I create an icon, that PSD file, I drop it into the Unity editor. And if I want to make changes to the icon and say that I want to change the background from white to black, Unity will detect those changes and reload the icon file right away. So the integration is seamless. I also love Photoshop because of many things. Like I use Photoshop for all the logos, the icons, all the different graphics that I have on my websites. So that is the graphic design tool that I love the most. I have used GIMP in the past, and that's how I started. I started into graphic design, but it wasn't as intuitive as I thought, so that's what I moved to Photoshop. And I also use Adobe Premiere. So you might ask, why do I use Adobe Premiere? And that the main reason is because I need to create trailers, I need to create videos. I need to create videos like this to people to see. I might not like, a specific frame in a video that I want to cut. I might want to add a transition animation. I might want to add some text, an overlay on a video. So Adobe Premiere works really well. It's at the beginning it was pretty hard to get familiar with because it's overwhelming. There's way too many options, but it's just like anything else. And I think the thing that we need to focus on is any new tool that we use, always think about the future. Always think about how you're going to use it, how is it going to be applied to other projects. For me, I know Photoshop will work with web development, also works for apps. So it's a tool that I can use for multiple purposes. The same thing with Adobe Premiere. I might use Adobe Premiere to create a video for a game that I'm launching, or I might use it to create a video for YouTube. I might also use it to, for many things that it has to do for videos. So anything video related, video editing, Adobe Premiere is my tool. And then as far as like coding and programming, so I use Unity, and I used to use Mono when Unity used to support Mono, and that worked really well for me. A lot of people used to and still use Visual Studio if you're running on a Windows box. And back then I used to, and I still use a MacBook Pro. So I couldn't really use Visual Studio, a few years back, but recently Microsoft has been pushing a lot to, platform of .NET Core, and they have been releasing into the market where you can have one build that works in multiple platforms. So they've been releasing a lot of tools recently, and one of them is Visual Studio Code, which works really well on Windows, on Mac, on Linux. So, and also Visual Studio for Mac, which is the tool that I use as my IDE. So for my IDE, I use Unity, and then I use, for my C# code, I use Visual Studio for Mac. I love Visual Studio for Mac because it's closer to the full version of Visual Studio. They're getting better and better with time, so it's pretty close to what Mona used to be. It just has a lot of added functionality, such as the auto completion, the IntelliSense. There's a lot of refactoring tools built in. There's also a lot of unit tests built in. So Visual Studio for Mac works really well if you have a Windows box. Use Visual Studio for Windows. They have a free version that you can use. And then lastly, source control. Source control is very, very, very important. And when I started, I used to use just the file system because it was just me. But later on, I found that using the file system when you wanted to track history wasn't really, really efficient. And I had an instance where I was making changes to a file, to a mechanic, and then I broke the mechanic, but I couldn't really revert back. And so I was saving copies of the source code, and a project in Unity can get really, really large. So if you start saving copies and copies over copies, you're gonna quickly run out of space on your disk. Even though you have a terabyte or half a terabyte, I mean those are gigs and gigs of size. So make sure that you don't do it that way. So what I've been doing lately is I've been using source control tools, such as I use Git. You can also use Mercurial. I know that Unity has basically a collaboration tool that you can use. They also use Git. So for me, I recommend that you use Git as your source control. So every game, every app, every tool that you create, make sure that you're always creating a Git repository before you start. And the reason for that is because you can track history. You can compare a file that you changed 10 days ago to a file that you changed today. You can also have that saved in the cloud. So for Git, you have a lot of options. You can use Visual Studio Online, which they have a free version where you can have unlimited repositories. And then you can also use Bitbucket. I've used them in the past. They're amazing. I use them right now for some of my apps and some of my games. And you can use GitHub. It's also amazing. They also support Git. So you have a lot of tools to source control your game code, to source control your apps. Just make sure that you use them really well and efficiently. So if you're starting out, make sure that you read about it and you learn about source control tools before just using the file system, because that's going to help you long term. For example, what helps me right now is if I want to have somebody else working in my project, say I found a freelancer, all I have to do is just give them rights to the Git repository. They'll get an email, and now they can download my code, they can make changes, they can push those changes to the cloud, I can review those changes, approve those changes, and then basically merge them back into the main branch, the main source code. So make sure that you're using source control, and because it's gonna help you long term. So just to reiterate on some of the tools that I recommend is Unity 3D as your game engine, and then Adobe Photoshop for your graphic design, and Adobe Premiere for your trailers, and then source control. And one thing that I didn't mention about source control, if you don't really want to do terminal commands, which is what I do for Git, you can use a tool called SourceTree. And SourceTree works in Windows, it also works in Mac, and it's basically a user interface that allows you to interface with Git. So it's you basically have a UI, you can add files through the UI, you can basically commit your changes and push your changes to the cloud, and it's really it's very user friendly. So I recommend using Source Tree for that. So yeah, I mean, those are some of the tools that I use. I hope that was helpful. There's a lot more tools, and I will probably have a second episode where I mention some of the other tools that I use to create games and apps, and some other tools that I also have been using that, you know, are beneficial for you and which ones are not beneficial. So thanks again for watching. I appreciate it. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. And again, thank you for watching the channel. Thank you.